Turning more specifically to the administration and, some reporting within the last day suggesting that certain members were flagging concerns related to coronavirus. And I think Rick Newman, maybe as we move past or move into at the full blame game stage of this, I don't think maybe. I think certainly some members, namely Peter Narvarro, would like to claim credit for knowing more about this pandemic than he probably did by leaking, obviously, to the New York Times the existence of a memo he wrote back in late January regarding the coronavirus.
Well, are you concluding that Navarro himself leaked that memo?
I am concluding that. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to conclude that.
It's an interesting question. I mean, so the basic story here is apparently Navarro did write this memo at the end of January. He wrote this to the task force the White House had just stood up. And he said, look, there's a situation developing in China that could hit the United States and become a full-blown pandemic. I think that's the phrase he used, full-blown pandemic. He predicted a worst-case scenario could involve 100 million Americans infected and 1.2 million deaths here in the United States. And lo and behold, about 6 weeks later, we got this big report out of the UK basically saying the same thing, so very similar projections. And the White House has acknowledged that, not rejected those. Now, that was if you do nothing. And we are obviously doing a lot with social distancing and closing businesses. But yeah, so this is evidence that there was at least one well-connected guy in the White House circulating this idea. And why Peter Narvarro? I mean, he's the trade guy at the White House. So why him? I think it actually makes sense because a big part of his portfolio in the White House is to watch China. And this obviously originated in Wuhan, China. And anybody watching China knew what was going on there. And they had a pandemic back in late January. So all you had to be doing was watching China and then knowing that something like this is going to, it's going to jump borders, which obviously it did, and make that prediction. He was not the only one, but he seems to be the only one in the White House at the time really taking it seriously.
Well, and I will say that, part of the memo, that is quoted in the New York Times, the story of its existence, is Navarro saying that this is not the time for penny pinching. And I think, Jen, we've talked so often about how the government, it has been bold, and I think it needs to continue to be bold in its fiscal response, because as Keith Lerner said, it's not really a fiscal response. It's basically just rescuing, stopgapping the economy. Like saying that we are stimulating is completely mischaracterizing what's really happening. We're just trying to get people to stay home and get them from point A to B. And however much money that takes, the government has the ability to print it. And Navarro is saying, don't, kind of let that ability go to waste.
Right. And Navarro was able to see that ahead of time and really call that out. And I think we do have to give credit where credit is due, however this got leaked and out. I mean, he was talking about it. I think the bigger issue is how this plays into the Trump administration and the trade war, how they have done business since they got into office, not making friends anywhere. And when you don't have friends on the other side, either of the aisle here in this country or around the world, it makes it very difficult to manage a crisis like this. And also who the different players are. Who do we believe? Why would this person be saying something when people have been out there antagonizing people? And so even if you're saying the right thing, if you're not the right messenger and you haven't been playing ball all along, it didn't do anything. And that's really sad at this point to look back at this memo now.
Hey, Myles, I'll just engage in the parlor game a little bit, the inside baseball of how leaks happen. So you do make a point that obviously it could have been Navarro himself leaking this. However, the argument against Navarro leaking this would be, it would be so self-serving for him to leak his own memo, especially because it would completely contradict the president himself. I mean, so Navarro, my guess is it was not him. I think it got out through some other channel because it would make him look like he was undermining Trump himself. And Navarro has been pretty good about not doing that, for what it's worth.
I think that's fair. Maybe it's someone on his staff who says, hey, maybe this guy should be getting more credit for this. But to me, it's like any source story, you say who benefits the most, that's the source. And that's kind of.
Well, I'm not sure Navarro benefits because he's going to earn Trump's wrath by coming out and saying, hey, I was telling the president this in late January. And by the way, we don't know if Trump actually saw this memo or not.
Right, right. Many things circulate in the West Wing and all administrations. It's unclear how far they get, no matter the circumstances.